If you're new here, hi, my name is Kate and I am a knitter based in Canada. And for the past year or so, I have been on a journey to build myself a handmade wardrobe. And in that process, I have definitely bought tools that I do not need. So in this video, I am here to show you the tools that are actually in my project bags that I use constantly. And if you stick around until the end, I'll show you my graveyard of unused tools so that we can hopefully save you some money. I'm going to approach this video as if I am out for coffee with a friend and my friend tells me that they are interested in starting to knit, which, by the way, if you are one of my friends watching this, that's the dream. Now, you might hear people say that all you need for knitting is yarn, needles, and maybe scissors. And that is true. Technically, absolutely true. But I do think that there's a very important other category, which I would call, if I lost mine today, I would be going shopping tomorrow to find a new one. Or you could also consider this like, you can knit without it, but personally I would be pulling my hair out. I have a few important points that I want to go over before we get into this video, just so that you understand what kind of a perspective you're going to get from me. First of all, I do consider myself like a bit of a minimalist. Obviously not completely, but in general, in order to reduce overwhelm in my life, I don't like to own more than I need to. Which brings me to my next point, which is that I do try to borrow and buy secondhand whenever possible. When I do feel that I need to buy something, I always check a local yarn store first. When I do believe that I need a new knitting tool, one thing that I like to think of is how many people over the years have taken up the craft of knitting and then given it up, which, no judgment, I have absolutely bought things for hobbies that I did not stick to. But that thought of how many knitting tools have been created makes me think, do I really need to buy a newly manufactured one? Or is this probably easily accessible at the thrift store? Now, sometimes the answer is no, and I absolutely go out and buy a new one. You'll see in this video plenty of newly purchased items, but that is just kind of a fun thought experiment that I thought that I would share. Final point, I am very fortunate at this point in my life to have a stable income and to have some budget for hobbies. However, that wasn't always the case, and I can definitely recognize when I have splurged on items in this collection that I wouldn't have a few years ago. So I'm going to be sure to indicate that when I have spent money that I don't feel is necessary to spend. Okay, so let's get right into it. I'm going to split these tools into 5 sections. There will be chapters below. If you feel like skipping around, feel free. Okay, let's get started with my project bags themselves and just generally the things that I put my knitting in. And this is the first one. This is a Delfonics inner carry case. And this actually isn't a knitting project bag. You will see specific bags that are made for knitting. I do not own any of those, and in general, I don't think that they're a necessity. Now, if you are like out at a local fiber festival and there's like a local vendor and you want to support them and you love their products, that's a different story. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, if you're getting into knitting, do not feel the need to go out and purchase a specific bag. This is basically a pencil case, and I owned it before I started knitting. So the reason that I like this particular one and have kind of repurposed it for knitting is that tons of pockets. It also has a zipper. And specifically, the reason that this has quickly become like my favorite project bag is that this zipper part kind of folds up. And what that means is that you can leave the yarn in here and then the yarn doesn't catch on the zipper on the way out, which is actually very convenient. It means that this can basically just sit up straight and you can have that on like the couch or whatever. So this is actually a surprisingly fantastic project bag, especially for something like a sock. This is a size medium, by the way. However, my point here is really that any bag will work. I've also in the past used tote bags, reusable grocery bags. You probably have a bag lying around that will work well as a project bag. Now, something with a similar construction is this guy. And I actually made this myself. I've got a few me-made sewing items in here, and for context, I am not an experienced sewist. I would consider myself like an overconfident beginner. So I feel like as long as you have a sewing machine and some level of experience with how to use it, all of the sewing patterns I'm about to show you are accessible. This one is the Plover Pouch by Noodlehead. It comes in 3 sizes, and this is the largest one. Very similar to the Delfonics case, actually, in terms of size, having a zipper. The only thing is that it does not do that nice folding thing, at least not easily. So I find that I don't reach for this one first. I think in the future I would like to find a sewing pattern that does this folding over thing. Also, this strap was a modification that I made so that I can hang it on that pegboard back there. But this pattern also has a full video tutorial, which was very useful. And there's a very good part of the pattern for an inner pocket, which I used to like put spare needles and stuff inside. Okay, next up is another handmade one. This is the Cozy Pouch, which is a sewing pattern by Incomplete Stitches. I really like this one. This was my first time quilting anything, and you can see it's not done very well, but it does the job. It's got a drawstring opening, so none of that issue with the zipper snagging. And this one, I believe, also comes in 3 sizes, and this was the largest one. And I really like this one because it's got that mix of different fabrics, so it's great for using scraps of fabric if you have any of that around. And I also thought when I was making this that it would be very easy to modify the size of the pattern if I ever did feel the need for a bigger project bag than this. I could do like a sweater size one if I really wanted to. Okay, which brings us to our final, not a bag, this is a bowl. Basically, when they get too big for any of those bags, I'm not going to be really taking them out of the house anyway, so I just kind of let them in this bowl to overflow. I right now just have yarn in here. The yarn needs to be caked up for my next project, which is something that we will discuss later in this video. By the way, this is just like a hand-me-down bowl. I know that there are like specific yarn bowls, but I would say that that's another thing where I might get one in the future if I really like a particular vendor. But in general, any bowl will work. This is one of those ones where, you know, when you're a young adult and you go home to visit your parents and they start trying to pawn stuff off on you, and it's like, hey, do you want to take this chair home? Do you want to take this bowl home? This was one of those. Okay, needle pouch. Now, you might be able to tell that this is another handmade item. This is, I believe the pattern is just called Needle Pouch. I will link the designer below and everything. And this, again, I'm not very experienced. I think that this was my first time doing bias binding, and you can see that it is not perfect, but it does do the job. And what I really liked about making my own needle pouch is that I was really able to customize it for my needs. So I was able to decide like how many slots I needed for needles and everything. I think if I did this in the future, which I might actually, because I have since acquired more needles, I think I would make it bigger, and I think I would do a different type of closure. This is supposed to be like tied up in a little bow, but as you can see, I never do that. However, this really just stays home. It doesn't go into my project bags. It just stays home so that I can grab the needles I need when I start a new project. Okay, and with that, I think we should head over to the desk and we can open up the needle case and one of the project bags so that you can see everything that's inside. I really liked this sewing pattern and being able to customize this. I love the inner pocket here. Now, I actually have 3 types of needles in here, so we're gonna go right to left. These are my interchangeable circular needles, but this here, I was gonna say set, but this actually isn't a set. This is like an assortment of brands that I either bought individually or got from family members. So I'll put a list up on the screen of brands that are compatible with each other for their interchangeable circular needles. And I really like using these. First of all, I just like the experience of knitting with the polished wood. But I also like that they are so easily available because of those different brands. Like, I find that there's a good chance that your local yarn store will carry one of the brands, and that way you can like pick up spare needles when you need them. Now, the reason that I didn't buy a set for these is that I did consider it, but I wanted to start off by only getting a couple of needles so that I could test it out and make sure I liked it. And then at that point, I had kind of figured out my preference for knitting. I do like knitting with wood, but you can also see that this size only goes from 3 millimeters here, and the biggest one I have here is 6 millimeters. And honestly, I've used that maybe once. So the range of needles that I use, of needle sizes that I use, is really quite small, and it doesn't really match with a lot of sets. A lot of the sets out there are like 3.5 millimeters up to like 12 millimeters. If I had bought one of those, it might have been like more affordable if you look at like dollars per needle, but I never would have used half of them. So I'm really happy with this decision. The other thing that I will mention with these needles is the cords. I don't love the cords. I would say that this is a disadvantage of this particular needle type. As you can see, they're not memoryless. Like, they really want to keep their shape, and they do tend to get like bunched up. I do have preferences between the brands though. I find that the needles are all the same for the brands, but for the cords, there's two that I lean towards. This clear one is Lykke, and it is a swivel cord. And this kind of silvery one is Lana Grossa. I think it's also made by Knit Pro, but it's Lana Grossa branding, and they have an option of swivel cords too. And what the swivel cord means, if you're new to knitting, is that when you're working on your knitting, this cord won't get like tangled up when the needle twists. And then I have my C-knit needles. These were a splurge for sure, especially with like the import fees and everything. These are from Japan. These were polished wood. These are bamboo. And I do like actually having both of them because these are a lot grippier than these. And the grippiness means that sometimes with a more rustic wool, I would want something more slippery like this. But if I'm working with something like cotton that is quite slippery, I might want that extra grip that this has. So I do like the bamboo for that. I also like C-knit because they have options to like define your own set. So here we were talking about how like the set sizes didn't really work for me. Here, I believe when I ordered this, I was able to like define what needle sizes I wanted in my set. I would say the big advantage of the C-knit ones is this cord is really nice. I can do kind of a side-by-side comparison. So this is the C-knit one, this is the Lykke one. And even though the Lykke one is the one I prefer, you can see how it's just a lot thicker and less flexible than the C-knit one. So the C-knit ones, they are a splurge, but it is a really nice knitting experience. It's actually a little bit frustrating because I would say that my like perfect needle would be these needle tips with these cords, and I obviously can't do that. If anyone has any recommendations, these are the shirataki ones from C-knit, by the way, which are the more affordable option, and they're just like less processed bamboo. I know that they also have a more processed option, but I don't know if that would get me closer to the like slipperiness of a polished wood like this. Oh, one other thing to mention, this is a knitting gauge that I keep in here because these have engraved needle sizes, which is fantastic. These ones are just kind of written on it, and this one still has the 6 millimeter one because I don't use 6 millimeters very often, but I found that by the end of like one big project, the number just rubs off of these, and then the knitting gauge can be used to figure out the size. And last thing in here is a bit of a surprise. This is my sock needle, which is a Chow-gu red lace needle. Not interchangeable, and it's I think 100 millimeters in length. I use this specifically for socks. It is the only metal in here. When I first started knitting, I borrowed some metal needles from a family member, and I like hated the experience. It was almost like a sensory experience where like the metal on metal, I just couldn't do it. So I really surprised myself when I started knitting socks and actually really liked the metal needles, but specifically for that. So this is in here for socks, and I guess also mittens now. Okay, and final thing in this pouch is kind of a random assortment of cable needles. These are all plastic, and I kind of wish that they weren't. Probably in the future, I'll invest in some kind of like bamboo or wood ones. But I do like to have a variety of cable needle shapes. And this one was from a family member. These ones I purchased, and they all do the job. I actually don't use cable needles all that much anymore because I can cable without a cable needle. But if the cable has enough stitches to it, I still like to have those. Quick change here, let's go into the project bag. I just pulled the actual project out so that there's a bit of space here. This isn't really about the project or the yarn, but if you're curious, this is the Kitten Catch Mitten by Florence Miller, which I am making as a gift knit. I'm really enjoying it so far. Obviously not super far in this, but if you do want to see the finished product, you can subscribe and you can see it in a knitting podcast coming pretty soon. This is on currently my C-Knit needles 2.5 millimeters, and I'm doing magic loop, and you can see how nice this cord is for magic loop. And we can dive into the tools that I keep in this bag. So this is just a little pouch. This is from Muji, and I will link to it if they still make it. I didn't get it for knitting. I think I originally got it for travel to put like chargers or toiletries in, but it's actually a great size. I'll just dump everything out and we can look through it. And I like having the pouch because I can just take that pouch and throw it into the project bag of whatever my current project is if I'm leaving the house for the day or whatever. Let's maybe start with the easy, kind of obvious ones. This is a cable needle, just like the other ones that I showed you in the needle bag, but I do like to keep one, and actually this is my favorite one. It's just by the brand Clover, but I didn't buy this. This was from a family member. And yeah, I just like to have one just in case I need to do cables, but as you can see, this is color work, so won't be doing it for this. Next, I've got a crochet hook. I don't know how to crochet. I can't tell you anything about this crochet hook. It was, again, from a family member who doesn't crochet or knit anymore. And this is a 3.5 millimeter hook. And honestly, I find that any crochet hook will do the job for knitting. For me, I really only use it to pick up stitches. It's another one of those things in that category of you can probably get away without it, but you'd be pulling your hair out trying to knit without this. I really think that like the most important part of knitting is being able to accept that you will make mistakes and then knowing how to confidently fix them. And the crochet hook is like the most important thing for that. And it also happens to fit perfectly in this pouch, which is really satisfying. Then we've got scissors. Any scissors will work, really just used to cut yarn. These are from the brand Tools to Live By. However, these are not specific to knitting. I had these for like stationery and have repurposed them for knitting. Any scissors will do the job. I just like having smaller ones so that I can put them in this pouch and so that they're super easy to just like have near me, pick up quickly, snip a cord. Yeah, I really like these ones, but I think any scissors, and specifically any little scissors, would be great. Okay, next we've got a tape measure. Again, I just like for it to be small and portable. You can get these at basically any local yarn store. Not a ton to say about that. Okay, this little tin unfortunately has some nuance to it. So I'll show you what's in here. This is barber cord, or I've also seen this called a few different things actually. I've seen it called try-it-on tubing. I think something else too. It's basically just a hollow plastic tube. So sometimes a pattern will tell you to put stitches on hold, and that means that you have to take some of your active stitches off of the needles, but keep them active for later. You can do that with waste yarn for sure. However, I find that if you're working on like a sweater and it tells you to put like 100 stitches on hold, then it's kind of annoying to be threading the waste yarn through all of it. So this is really nice. It basically means that you can just stick the needle into the barber cord and then slide the stitches onto the barber cord. But the reason that I said that there was nuance to this is that I didn't actually buy it in this tin. I bought it on a big spool. You can find these big spools at a lot of like big craft stores, and it's much better value for money. You will see some like pre-cut options sold in tins kind of like this. I think slightly bigger than this. But yeah, I say there's some nuance to it because I do like to err on the side of supporting local yarn stores. Okay, and final thing is this tin. I'm just gonna go ahead and dump it out and we can see what's inside. So this tin I keep next to me whenever I'm knitting, and first thing in here is a darning needle. This is another one of those things in that category of maybe technically you could get away without it, but you kind of need it. This is not a sewing needle. You can see it's very dull. It also, not all darning needles are like this, but this one has a bent tip. That's just my preference. I also really like the metal ones. I find that this is a really good experience for like Italian bind-offs, and they're also used for weaving in ends. So I use this a lot, and I do really like the metal ones. Sort of similar looking is this pin. The pin comes with those needles that I showed you, not the C-knit ones, but the ones that are like Knit Pro and Lykke. There's basically a little hole in the needles, and you can use this to tighten the needle onto the cord so that it doesn't come off. Really important if you are using those needles. And then we have all of my stitch markers. So I'll maybe separate this into a couple categories. These are just little light bulb ones here. The light bulb ones I didn't buy for myself, but if I lost them, I think I would replace them because they're really nice. They're basically just light bulb shaped safety pins. And the reason the safety pin format is kind of nice is you can open it up and you could then mark something on your knitting that's already been knit. Or you could, if I often will forget to place stitch markers, and then I'm having to place a stitch marker somewhere on the cord of the active stitches. And this kind of stitch marker is really good for that. They're also just kind of nice and light and minimal. So I like those quite a bit. These, however, were a bit of a splurge. These are by Coco Knits, and this was called a flight of stitch markers. And these weren't the only stitch markers in that flight. There were also some triangular ones and some larger ones, but we've discussed that I don't really do large gauge knitting. So these are the ones that I tend to use a lot. I love that they're different colors because it means that I could place like maybe a few of the purple ones, but then maybe use a green one as a beginning of round marker and have the different colors mean different things. Coco Knits is a bit of a splurge. I feel like you kind of pay a premium to have things look aesthetically pleasing. But personally, I don't really mind with this. These seem to be really high quality. They're like some kind of coated metal. And honestly, I feel like with the number of these I got, I don't see myself ever needing to buy stitch markers again. So really happy with these. I use them a ton. Okay, I have one final category for you, which is things that are too big to put in a project bag, and therefore, of course, they stay at home. I personally own 3 that I can think of in this category. The first, I'll put 2 together, and that is a Swift and a ball winder. These are from my mom. She wasn't using them, so I have them now. This is not something that I would recommend buying if you are a beginner knitter and you're just trying to figure out if you like this craft. So basically, you sometimes buy yarn, or I sometimes buy yarn, that it is sold like this, in this kind of twisty thing called a hank. When the yarn is in a hank like this, you can't, or at least you can't easily knit directly from it. So you need to take it out of the hank and wind it into something else. Now, you could theoretically like hold it out on someone's arms, or I know people like put it around like a rolly chair. To me, that sounds a little fiddly. So I do like that I have a Swift for this. However, if I was a beginner knitter, or what I would tell a beginner knitter is just avoid at first yarn that is sold like this. If you have yarn that is in something like a ball, you don't need to worry about this at all. I think that as a beginner, I would start with yarn like that. And then once I decided that I was like in this craft for the long haul, that's when I might invest in a Swift and a yarn winder. And just to show you, this is the cake of yarn, so this is what it gives you in the end. I really like knitting out of cakes. I find it to be a nice experience. So I'm very happy to have my yarn winder for that. That being said, I again knit basically like every day. I only take out my Swift maybe once a month. So it's not something that you need access to on a regular basis. And based on that, if you do have like a local library that lets you use one for free, I think that would be a great option. Also, a lot of local yarn stores will cake up the yarn when you buy it, which makes this an option even if you don't have a Swift and yarn winder. So lots of options, but I would say if you're really worried that you need a Swift, you probably don't. Okay, and then the other item is blocking materials. Now you will see these like blocking kits that are sold, which are basically like foam boards that you can lie your wet knitwear on to block it. And then there are pins that you can stick in to like block them into the correct shape that you want. I don't own anything like that. I have been tempted by it in the past, but what I've always used is a old yoga mat I have around that I don't use a ton anymore. And then I will sometimes lay old towels out on it. And I find that the towels give the knit enough kind of like friction that it doesn't really need to be pinned down. Now, there's one occasion where I did stick pins into that yoga mat, and that was when I was working on, well, when I had finished the Staffen vest, which has like some 2x2 ribbing, which wanted to cinch in. So when I really felt that I needed to pin it out to block it, I didn't get like specific blocking pins or anything. I used some of those like round head pins that are used for sewing, and I just stabbed those into the yoga mat and it worked perfectly fine. So the way that I would categorize blocking materials is not a necessity, but if one showed up at my house tomorrow, I wouldn't complain about it. But basically the way I would say that is that I've never felt it was such a necessity that I've like added it to my cart or gone out of my way to buy one. Okay, and if you've made it this far, we're gonna go back to the desk for just a second and I will show you my graveyard of unused tools. There's actually less in here than I thought there was, which makes me kind of happy, but I do think that there's a couple specific lessons that I can learn here. The first category being row counting. So I said earlier that I prefer to count my rows just with a notebook doing tallies. So I didn't really need to purchase any tools specific for counting rows. That's just a personal thing. If you find that you don't like using a notebook, then something like this might be really useful. I've also found that I just count rows less as I've learned to read my knitting better. But if you are looking for something to count your rows with, I don't dislike any of this. This one is by Coco Knits, and it's actually quite satisfying. And you can see that I used it quite a lot because I got up to 87 here. So this one is quite nice. I just find that I prefer paper. And then this one is also nice because what you can do is, I'll maybe just take my crochet hook as an example here since I have it. You can use this as a beginning of round marker, and then when you get to the beginning of your round, you just take a second to switch this to the next one. So that kind of ensures that you won't forget to do your row counter, which is nice. So again, I don't dislike these, and these were actually from a small business on Etsy, which I will link to if I can find it. This is the plastic one that I mentioned. Totally works as a darning needle, but I don't really use it. I prefer the metal one. This was something I did not need to purchase. So you saw the crochet hook that I use. The crochet hook was just like a borrowed one from a family member. It does the job, really like using it for picking up stitches. Then I decided that it might be nice to have a shorter one. This one fits in that pouch that I showed you, but for whatever reason I thought it might be nice to have a smaller one. So I bought this. This has a few different sizes of crochet hooks, and I've just found that I never use this. I actually prefer the one that I did not buy and borrowed from a family member. So I think the lesson here is don't try to solve a problem that you do not have. Like, the other crochet hook was doing the job just fine. I didn't need to go out and buy another. Now, there is one novelty stitch marker at the bottom of there, but these are from my journey of finding a sock needle that I like. Don't fully regret buying any of these. These are by Gu, and they're bamboo needles. And I think these are 2.25, yeah, 2.25 millimeters. And then these are the Haya flyers. So I think if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's that I don't like using bamboo for something as small gauge as socks. For whatever reason, I surprised myself by liking metal for that. So I don't fully regret these purchases. However, the Haya flyers, these, if you're not familiar, are like halfway in between circular needles and DPNs, double pointed needles. So they're basically like flexible double pointed needles. And I have tried double pointed needles. I could not get them to feel comfortable in my hands. I found that they were like stabbing my hands as I was knitting, and I just hated the experience. But I did really want to like them, which is why I bought these as kind of like a halfway point. However, Magic Loop was working perfectly fine for me, so again, I don't think I should have tried to solve a problem that I didn't really have. Magic Loop was working fine, and if you are looking to get some sock needles, by the way, I found that these bamboo ones, I used them for like half a sock and found that they were really starting to bend. Like, I don't know if you can see that, but it was starting to make me really nervous that it was kind of flimsy and it was gonna snap. And that's when I switched to the metal ones. And then the last thing in here is these. These are 7 millimeter needles. And as we've discussed, I don't really do large gauge knitting. So I used these, I think, once, and I don't really foresee myself using them in the future. So yeah, if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's really just to try to learn your preferences before going out and purchasing anything. So that's everything that I have for you today. If you're new here, I'm going to link to my podcast episodes so that you can see the kind of things that I knit and the kind of content that I put out on a more regular basis. And do feel free to subscribe. Thank you.